Before jumping into teaching you guys actual signs, I wanted to go over some basic etiquette for dealing with DHH students. I'm going to be outlining 5 different things in this video. First, when speaking to a deaf and hard of hearing student, do not exaggerate your speech, shout at them, or move your mouth in any sort of abnormal way. Why? When deaf and hard of hearing students learn how to lip read, they learn based off of the normal mouth movements that people in their life make. So, when you exaggerate your mouth, it actually makes it harder for them to understand what you're saying because it looks abnormal. Additionally, shouting is probably not going to help them hear you any better, and it's just going to draw attention to the fact that they can't hear you in the first place. 2. Deaf is not dumb. Hopefully this is obvious in 2017, but your ability or inability to hear does not have any correlation to your intellectual abilities. The history of deaf people in the United States and across the world is lathered with stigmatization, from the slogan of deaf and dumb, which was very popular especially in the 1800s and 1900s, to being locked in insane asylums, to being classified as mentally retarded for a long period of the existence of deaf people. Deaf people have the ability to succeed in the same capacity as any hearing person if they are given the right accommodations. So, don't perpetuate any negative stereotypes, and you should treat your deaf and hard of hearing student as if they are on the same intellectual plane as all of your hearing peers, because they are, unless you're aware of any specific intellectual deficits based on that individual student's IEP. 3. ASL is not English. Many people have the misconception that sign language is just English translated into signs. That is not correct. That is a language that exists, and it's called Signed English, and it's hardly used by the deaf and hard of hearing community. American Sign Language, on the other hand, has its own syntax, rules, structure, grammar, history, culture, and identity attached to it. So when you see an interpreter translating into American Sign Language, you should respect that language as not just a remanifestation of English into signs, but as its own language that should be respected and treated as such. 4. Don't speak to an interpreter when the deaf and hard of hearing student is right in front of you. You should acknowledge your interpreter in the same way that you would acknowledge an electronic translator that is not a human that you can't talk to. It is incredibly rude to speak to an interpreter or ask them to ask a student something on your behalf. Their only purpose is to serve as a translator between you and that student. You should not acknowledge them as their own entity or their own person, and you should be speaking to a deaf and hard of hearing student directly. And when they need translation, they will look towards your interpreter. It is very disrespectful to speak simply to an interpreter because it implies that the deaf and hard of hearing student can't speak for themselves. And 5. Deaf culture and deaf pride exist. It's very common within the hearing community to look down on deaf people or say that they're so brave for existing how they are, or acknowledging what they have as a disability. However, for people within the deaf and hard of hearing community, being deaf is a huge part of their identity, and it's something that they've reclaimed over time, from the Deaf Present Now movement at Gallaudet University, to deaf art, to sign language poetry, to sign language slams that travel across the United States, to the rise of the use of sign language in popular media, such as shows as Switched at Birth. These are all very important pieces to deaf identity, and a lot of deaf people, if you ask them, wouldn't choose to be hearing if they had the option because of just how important it is to their identity. So, when you're acknowledging a deaf and hard of hearing student, don't look down at them with any sort of condescension or see them as being disabled, because for a lot of people, this is a huge part of who they are and something they're very proud of.